The NBA regular season has concluded, and the league sets to commence the playoffs, starting with the play-in tournament that begins tomorrow night, and the start of the actual playoffs will begin on Saturday. And with the Chicago Bulls finishing 6th in the East, they'll be taking on the team just a few miles north of them in the Milwaukee Bucks, which I think most Bulls fans will agree this is really the last team we would have wanted to face in a first-round series. But you know what? Bring on the defending champs. The Bulls are going to be going to the playoffs for the first time in 5 years, so I am excited no matter who they're going to be going up against. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about this upcoming playoff series between the Bulls and the Bucks, things to be watching out for, keys for the Bulls to hopefully at least make this thing competitive, who are going to be the X factors of this series, and I'll also be giving my predictions for the series as well. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, with the way the Bulls closed out the regular season, it makes it a little hard to be excited about going into the playoffs. You're talking about a team that had a great start to their year. They even held the #1 spot in the East for a period of time during the season, even leading up to the All-Star break. They were right up there at the top of the Eastern Conference, and it looked like the Bulls were likely going to be making a playoff run with the kind of performance that they were putting on. But then, of course, injuries derailed them a bit. The schedule started getting a bit more difficult, and after the All-Star break, the Bulls really started crashing and taking a nosedive in the standings, and they really look like a completely different team while doing it. Their level of energy and confidence changed, their style of play had shifted to a more ISO-heavy offense. So because of all of this, and how much the Bulls slumped at the end of the season, it really made getting excited for the playoffs difficult, especially knowing they were going to be going up against one of the top Eastern Conference teams. But if there is anything we have learned about this Bulls team this season, is that they are wildly inconsistent in their play. And who knows, maybe they'll be able to turn things around into the playoffs, because for the Bulls, they have a lot to prove about who they are as a team. A team that a lot of people counted out to start the season. A lot of people said DeMar and Zach wouldn't fit well together. A lot of people said that DeRozan was the worst signing of the offseason. A lot of people said the Bulls were going to have a terrible defense. People said they gave up way too much in the Vucevic trade or paid too much for Lonzo Ball. You had some analysts say that the Bulls were going to miss the play-in. I mean, the list goes on and on as far as how many people doubted the Bulls and how this team was actually going to be able to work. And right away, they proved all of the doubters wrong. They surprised the NBA world with the strong start that they had. Even Bulls fans like myself did not expect them to be as good as they were at the top of the East going into the All-Star break. Then the Bulls came back down to earth. DeMar, who was playing like an MVP candidate at the age of 32, cooled off a bit. Zach Lavine started struggling with his lingering knee injury. Vucevic never really took off like we had hoped that he would, you know, with the narrative of Vuce always struggles to start the season, he'll eventually pick it up. Well, that proved to never really be the case. Yes, he had some good stretches here and there, and he's still a great player, but he never really got to the all-star level caliber level of player the Bulls thought that he would become this season. And even with the surprise rookie season of Dosunmu and what he's been able to do, he hit a bit of a rookie wall after the All-Star break, even though you have to be pretty pleased with the kind of season that Iowa's had, being a second-round pick. And then, of course, we learned that Lonzo Ball was not going to be returning this season. So that second half of the year was very brutal for the Bulls. And all the doubters and haters came out of the woodwork and said, see, we told you guys this was going to happen. We knew this Bulls team wasn't going to amount to anything. We knew it wasn't going to work. And hopefully all of that noise and those doubts sits with these Bulls players, and it lights a fire under them yet again to prove all of the doubters wrong. Like we talked about at the beginning of the season, so many of the Bulls players have chips on their shoulders based on the perception of them. DeMar DeRozan being counted out in the league as not fitting in today's NBA, centered around floor spacing and three-point shooting. Zach Lavine as an empty stat player who cannot win. Patrick Williams is a player who was drafted too high for his skills. Lonzo Ball, too much hype because he's a ball brother. Dosunmu getting drafted in the second round and being counted out by so many teams because he was an older rookie. I mean, the list goes on and on. Like, so many of these guys on the roster had something to prove, and that fueled them at the beginning of the season. And that fuel ran out towards the end of the year. But can they bring it back up and play at that level for where they started the season? Now, I know some people will say, well, regardless of how they played to start the year, they still couldn't beat the best teams in the league. In fact, they lost every game. They played a top 3 team in each conference at any point in the season. And yes, that is true. But what was also somewhat encouraging was that among all these top teams in the league that they faced, one team in particular, they were the most competitive against. Well, I guess I should say for the first 2 games anyway, before the Bulls really started crashing and burning, and that was the Milwaukee Bucks. in that the Bulls, in their first matchup against the Bucks, they lost by 4 points and really took it to the wire despite not having Zach Lavine and Lonzo Ball in that game. Like, the Bulls had to start Tyler Cook in that one and gave Matt Thomas 19 minutes, for crying out loud. And of course, this was the game in which Caruso suffered that wrist injury after the bitch move by Grayson Allen. The next matchup, back in Chicago, the Bulls lost by 6 and really lost that game in the fourth quarter when they allowed the Bucks to outscore them 37-24 in the fourth. The last 2 games, which happened closely together, yeah, the Bulls got waxed by the Bucks, and those games weren't even close. But to be honest, that ended up being the case with most of the games they played after the All-Star break. So what do the Bulls need to do to at least make this series competitive? Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you the Bulls can win this series. I think it's incredibly unlikely that they would beat the Bucks in a 7-game series, especially after the way they closed out the season. I've said it before, I think the Bulls will be lucky to win 1 game if they keep up the trend for which they've been playing, but I do think they could at least make a competitive series if they can stay focused and play with that fire and energy to prove all of the doubters wrong like we saw at the beginning of the season. Now, no question, not having Lonzo Ball hurts them, especially when the Bucks have such a savvy veteran point guard in Jrue Holiday. Lonzo Ball would be a much better matchup going against Holiday with Lonzo's IQ and defensive abilities on the perimeter, and you're asking a lot of a rookie point guard in Dosunmu, who I presume the Bulls are going to start at that point. Billy Donovan would be insane to start Coby White in that role, as that clearly didn't work out when he tried to do that the other day against the Hornets, but this is a huge opportunity for Ayo, who said before he knew there weren't 37 players better than him in the NBA draft. This is a big opportunity for him to showcase on the biggest stage in basketball why all of these teams messed up in not picking him. You're going to need Ayo to have a big series going against the experience of Jrue Holiday, who really went at Ayo in that second game against them at the United Center when the Bulls led the Bucks going into the fourth, and Holiday took over and got to help the Bucks secure that win. The other thing that we really need to see, and we saw some of this last night, guys like DeMar and Zach have to trust their teammates and not try to take over games by playing iso ball. Like, if there was anything we learned from why the Bulls started falling after the All-Star break and losing to all of the top teams, is because other teams started to figure the Bulls out. Double DeMar, double Zach. And great teams with great coaches will capitalize on that and expose your weaknesses. The Bulls have to keep the opposing team guessing. They have to switch things up a bit by getting other guys involved and not just rely on DeMar and Zach to score. It's too predictable. And what we saw last night in that game against the Timberwolves is that guys like Patrick Williams and Ayo Dosunmu, even Javonte Green, you can go to them to make the right decision on the court. You can go to them for not only some scoring, but also to defend. Trust in some of your other players and run the offense through them occasionally and not be so predictable on what you're going to run. Another thing for this series, Vucevic. I've been saying it all season, and I know you guys are probably getting tired of me saying it by now, but Vucevic is the X factor for this team. You need Vucevic to play at an all-star level if the Bulls even want to have a chance in this series. And I'll say it again, Vucevic needs to be playing inside in this series and can't just be hoisting up threes, because he really just hasn't been a great three-point shooter at all this season. He's by far more effective when he's operating in the post. And when he's going up against a guy like Brook Lopez, who isn't a good defender, this is an opportunity for Vuce to focus on dominating in the paint, because he really lucked out not having to go up against Joel Embiid in the playoffs. And this is another case for DeMar and Zach needing to trust in their teammates. Feed Vucevic the ball in the paint, because not only can Vuce score in the paint against someone like Brook Lopez, but he's an underrated playmaker and can make things happen for others down low, finding the open man or a cutter to the basket. You have to utilize Vuce to his strengths. And then, of course, this is going to be a big series for Patrick Williams. Like, for a guy who has barely played all season due to his injury, the Bulls are going to need him to step up in a massive way this series, and not only guarding the best player in basketball. Yes, I do think Giannis is the best player in the NBA. But not only that, we're going to need to see Patrick Williams, the Patrick Williams we saw from last night on offense. We need to see Patrick Williams step up and being more aggressive on the offensive end and being another scoring option for the Bulls. Because I said it in last night's game, with how inconsistent Vucevic and Coby have been this season, if they're off, you're going to need a third option when you don't have Lonzo Ball. And that has to be Patrick Williams. He has the tools and the skills to be a good scorer. It's all about the confidence with Patrick, and hopefully the game against the Timberwolves, even though it was a pretty meaningless game, was enough to give him a little boost of confidence going into the playoffs. And of course, you can't forget about DeMar and Zach. Your best players, your primary scorers. Without these guys playing their A game, the Bulls don't stand a chance in the series. And really, the Bucks, of all teams, provides them the best matchups in terms of players who they'll be going against, because the biggest mismatch for the Bulls that the Bucks have over them is their sheer size and length with guys like Giannis, Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, Serge Ibaka, and Chris Middleton. But the Bucks aren't very deep in that shooting guard role, where they have guys like Grayson Allen and Pat Connaughton. Like, rather than Lavine and DeRozan having to go head-to-head against Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown in a playoff series, you're going to be going up against Grayson Allen. Chris Middleton, obviously a great player, a lot bigger than both of them, but he's also not an impeccable defender by any means. Zach and DeMar need to be smart in picking their shots. Their shot selection has to be calculated, and they need to be active with their ball movement and not just trying to draw up ISO plays on every possession. That does not work, especially not against a team like the Bucks, which is a very good defensive team and also a great rebounding team that isn't going to allow that many second chance opportunities when you miss shots. If Lavine and DeRozan play the way they have been with their ISO-heavy offense, you're going to be seeing a lot of one-and-done possessions. And then I'll end it with this, and it relates to Billy Donovan. Billy Donovan has to be better in making in-game adjustments. He's going to be going against the defending champions, going against one of the best coaches in the league. They are going to be the ones that are assessing the lineups and matchups and making adjustments to capitalize on the Bulls' weaknesses. Billy Donovan needs to be adjusting his rotations as a result and maximizing any holes or gaps in the Bucks offense. It's something we have talked about with Billy all season, and can he get the most of the talent on this roster and utilize it to their strengths going against the defending champions? Here's the thing, you're not going to stop Giannis. Like, no matter what you do, you're not going to stop him. He's going to get his, and you just have to live with that. The most you can do is try to send him to the foul line, but even then, he's been improving his free throw shooting. So your focus has to be figuring out how you limit other guys on the Bucks roster. How do you ensure Chris Middleton doesn't get hot? How do you slow Jrue Holiday down when he's running the offense? How do you close out guys like Brook Lopez who can space the floor and make you pay if you lose focus? And how do you limit that clown Grayson Allen from getting easy looks? Giannis is going to get his. It's about what you can do to limit the roster to where Giannis is having to do everything by himself. So if the Bulls can do all of these things, again, a tall order, then they can potentially make it a competitive series. As for my predictions, though, and I'll keep it short as I know this video is kind of dragging on, as much as I'd like to think the Bulls are going to get it together and make this a fun series, I really don't see this being any better than a 5-game series. I think the Bucks win it in 5. The Bulls will likely win Game 3, the first of their games at the United Center, and to be honest, I wouldn't be shocked if it was a sweep either. I know it's not the most optimistic outlook, but it's just the reality of the situation that the Bulls find themselves in. But I want to know what you guys think. How do you think this series will play out? Let me know in the comments how many games you think this series will go. Of course, be sure to subscribe as I'll be covering the Bulls throughout the playoffs. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.